an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering The Magicians, Season 2, Episode 11, The Rattening. In this episode, Quentin and Julia take a trip down to the underworld, and back in Fillory, a bunch of people get turned into rats because, I guess, Margot's trying to dick over the fairies, and they are not fans of people reneging on their deals. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Jesse for commissioning this episode. This episode, guys, I really don't know what to make of things, and I don't know how much you can tell me or how much of it is supposed to be understood or how much of it's like a spoiler. So we'll get to it, and I would really like to hear what y'all have to say. But we start off with Julia saying to Quentin that he doesn't have to come with her, and in fact, she kind of thinks he shouldn't come with her. And as she says this, they come upon a manhole cover in the ground, and there is a ton of energy coming off it, steam pouring out from under it, and apparently it has ancient Greek writing on it instead of like the usual design that's left for manhole covers. And he is able to read that it requires a milk tooth, which Julia doesn't know what that means, but it's baby teeth. And he mentions how there's like a molar in his mouth that didn't come in. And without even thinking about it, she's like, oh, I know an extraction spell, and immediately just does it and gets his tooth. But yeah, there's a lot of pain and blood. And I was just like, girl, you better know a fucking pain-killing spell too, because just yanking somebody's tooth out, whether it is magic or not, that does it, that's gotta be super fucking painful. And I'm not sure that I would be able to like not scream in the alley and draw some attention. Although they're in New York, how much attention will that draw? So they toss that tooth down there and get immediate access. I have to be honest, y'all. I did not understand how quick this all went down. I don't know exactly how they find the location of this place, because she like found that entry in that book talking about what the ancient ones are, but I'm not sure where they found a like location in the city for this one specifically. And they go down for an interview with this dragon, and I am curious to hear how y'all felt about the dragon, because I found it to be a little bit too, like, I felt like they were trying too hard to be funny, and it wound up, like, not really landing for me. There were a couple of jokes, and then, like, once they finally leave, the dragon mutters to itself, fucking millennials. And I was like, I get what you're going for here, trying to make this dragon almost like boomer-esque in the fact that it's like, you know, 1,000,000 years old and very impatient with young ones and humans especially. She keeps calling them mammals. But it just didn't really, it either didn't go far enough or it went in the wrong direction for me. And I can't quite tell you what I would have preferred, but I feel like I almost think that they have reached a point in the Magicians overall that making like these large, powerful creatures seem sort of irreverent and making them like swear and be impatient and frustrated and annoyed is so predictable at this point that it doesn't really work to be surprising anymore. And I wanted something a little bit different. I just I can't really like tell you what that means. I'm not sure. But it felt like we have met things like this dragon a million times so far. You know what I mean? Jesse says, I love the idea of the dragon and how she looks, but I didn't need the millennial line eye roll. Yeah, I eye rolled also. It was because there are times where like a line doesn't exactly work for me in the moment, but I'll think back on it and I'll sort of like it retrospect, you know, and this was just one of those that in the moment I was like, really? And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, God, that was really bad. But I will agree with Jessie in that she looks cool as hell. Like, I'm impressed with how much the CGI in this show works, considering everything. It's just impressive because sometimes this sort of thing, you can see what they're going for and you really want to like it. And you're just kind of like, you know, it's fine. But I did think she actually looked really cool. And they have a nice effect where the dragon agrees to send them over to the underworld. But if they take too long, she will eat them. And they are like left laying on the ground while their spirits travel away. And it appears that like somehow her breathing on them separated their spirit from their body. And I found it really interesting that Julia had a spirit, because I kind of expected that to be what the shade was. I thought that was going to be what was missing. But apparently she still has a spirit and the shade is just like a portion of the spirit. So that's interesting. And I would like to know what the rest of it is composed of. So they wind up on this elevator and they are let into a lobby of what looks to be like a really mid-level hotel. Now, guys, I don't know what, like, because one of my favorite things about traveling to Underworld in storylines is getting to see the very different ideas for what the Underworld is like. I don't know what y'all expected. I was hoping for something a little bit more like mythical, but I wasn't totally surprised that it wound up being something like this. I don't know how many of you have seen The Leftovers, but it sort of reminded me of that a little bit. And it's super depressing. I mean, the place is like all done up in like shades of beige with like green highlights here and there. And there's a bellhop that introduces like himself and tells them to take a number and welcomes them to the underworld. And I love Quentin's, like the expression on Quentin's face is just, what the fuck? Meanwhile, Julia is kind of amused by this. It seems like she really is sort of, well, who knows? All right. Yeah. Let's take a number then. So I'm going to just go through their entire storyline, by the way, before going back and dealing with what's going on in Fillory. So then we jump to what's like a fireside chat with this dude and his Labrador retriever that's sitting next to him. And he's like, congratulations, you're dead. You've passed through the veil to the underworld. I would like to point out how weird it is that there's like this video going with only about 10 people clustered around it, and that not everybody even gets seats. It just feels very disorganized and just sort of like the beginning of going on a vacation that's like been outlined by tour guides, that they've like cobbled it together, and they just, you know, have their group of people that they're responsible for, but the hotel doesn't exactly accommodate the fact that you're traveling in a group. You just have to do the best you can with whatever is already in place in the lobby and sort of carve out a spot for yourselves. But the thing is that this video is clearly like in a dedicated spot. So what I'm saying is they need a ballroom and they need to be like showing this video in a more comfortable space with cocktails, make it like a symposium or some sort of like a, like a workshop, like a TED Talk, right? I don't like this. Whoever's planning the underworld, you're not doing a great job. And he says, is this your final destination? No, it's the first leg of your journey. We designed this part of the underworld for you. And as he's saying this, Quentin picks up this pamphlet that's off to the side, and it says, don't panic. You're probably not going to hell, which I thought was pretty good. And he says, based on your life and expectations, this has been designed for you to facilitate a comfortable transition, and you've been grouped with others who have similar expectations. Now, I really liked that because this is something that comes up in a lot of other like literature and television shows, is the idea that the afterlife is sort of whatever you believed it was going to be. And that depending on who you are, you're going to have a totally different experience than somebody else. But you've still both been in the afterlife. It's just, it's dependent on the person. And I like the idea that everybody who died gets split off into groups that are more or less handled in order to reach the expectation that those people have. Hugabug says, yeah, their underworld is more like a purgatory, just a way station until you get to your final destination. So everything is just kind of boring. It's super boring. Like, honestly, if I died and this was my way station, I'd be so mad. I would love to know what it looks like for people who aren't Quentin and Julia. Like, would I wind up here? I don't even know what my expectation really is. So I don't know if it lines up with theirs or not. But I like to think that it would be a lot radder than this. At least, like, the wait can just, a wait could be so, guys, listen, I am weirdly patient when it comes to certain things. And I'm a big fan of sitting still and a big fan of like cuddling up. And I really want my underworld like waiting room to be like a cafe or a tea shop or something. Give me a rainy outside like it is right now. Give me a mug of like really high quality hot cocoa and a couch. I'm good. I don't really need much else. You can give me a book. I don't need a book. I'll just sit there. I'm fine with that. I mean, I'm just saying. Apparently, there are so many, like, well, I'm getting off track. Jesse says, your underworld would be definitely the same as Margot's, hypothetically, not a spoiler. I wonder about that, because I feel like Jesse's, you see, I'm addressing you like you're Margot. I feel like Margot's would be, like, really sexy. I feel like Margot's way station would just be like a bunch of, like a, speed dating or something. But anyway, so at this point, Julia says, ow, and she lifts up her shirt and we see that there is this like hollow in her stomach, like this hole that goes straight through from one side to the other, with these like sort of strands of flesh covering it. It's real creepy looking. It almost looks like a giant cigarette burn in a way. But as if that happened from the inside. And he says something on the screen about how if you are without a shade, report to a bellhop immediately. And just as he says that, somebody off to the side yells, security, we have a shadeless patron. And we see two security people hustling off some man who's like arguing with them and going, ow, what are you doing? Let go. And they both say, all right, well, I guess we are not going to be reporting to a bellhop. And then their number is called. They have to place their hands on these like sort of crystal, like flat, they almost look like the geode slices that you would get at like science stores when you were a kid. And they ask about this dude getting carted off, and this guy behind the counter says, "Oh, his soul is missing a little piece. They just took him somewhere where he would be more comfortable." And Julia asks, "So he could be reunited with it?" And he says, "I doubt it. That's very difficult to do, especially after a prolonged separation." And she starts to say, "Yeah, but you can't just take," and he says, "I assure you all shades are safe and well protected for their eternity." And we find out a little bit later just how much bullshit that is, because she and Quentin can just walk the fuck up in there and take one. And I don't feel like that seems safe or well protected. So evidently they're being tossed into an abandoned house and left to fend for themselves, and everybody's fine with that. Seems like a bad plan to me, but whatever. So behind the counter, this guy is looking up Quentin and Julia's histories, and it says that they have each died 39 times. And he says something about how his computer has a little bit of trouble processing things like this, so it's going to take a little of extra time. But it's obviously a time loop. Once you're in the system, what is it that he says? He's like, yeah, time loop, thought so. Our computers do not handle these well. This will take a bit to sort out. Once you're in the system, we'll reunite you with your immediate karmic circle. But until then, I'll need to stick you somewhere. Do you like skiing? So I really wonder, because like it's mentioned that there are a bunch of areas that look like Hawaii. The skiing is brought up here. He says something about snorkeling. And then they wind up in a bowling alley. And I have to wonder why anybody would pick a bowling alley. Like, genuinely. What are you doing? Guys, I don't know about y'all, but I find bowling alleys to be one of the most depressing places in modern day society. Like, there are some bowling alleys which are cool. When we went to Orlando, the hotel we stayed at had a bowling alley in it, and it was actually dope. But they are like the minority, and the one that they go to fits the bill for me for depressing. Kinds of places that it really feels like there's been a lot of beer spilled, and it's got that sort of smell that it gets when things are a little bit like mildewy and old, but also mixed with like old beer. Probably there's the smell of cigarettes that still lingers from when they decided to make it illegal to smoke inside 20 years ago, but you never really get that smell out. And there's just like, I don't know, there's a whole vibe to it. And picking a bowling alley, my God, what are you doing? Hugabug says, it reminds me of that line in Oh, the Places You'll Go. For people just waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or the mail to come, or the rain to go, or a phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. Forgot about that. Yeah, I liked that, because it just really is a reminder that, like, hey, you know, you got to live your life, and just kind of predicating all of your happiness on a particular thing is going to ruin your life. You're always going to be waiting for the next thing that's supposedly going to make you happy, and none of that's actually going to work. Surprise. But this, like, the two of them, when they get sent down to the bowling alley, when he says, like, reunited with your karmic circle, I didn't even know what that meant. And then I came to realize a little bit later that it just means like the people that you were in contact with in life who had an effect on what you learned as a person and the experiences you had, which I thought was a cool idea. And I didn't even think about it, but the person that Julia was looking for was fucking what's his face, the one who Reynard took his body, Richard. And it's a great moment of him greeting Julia and her having to like sort of take a second, because he just looks so much like this guy that fucking raped her and killed a bunch of people that it's hard for her to not react to him in the same way as she would react to Reynard. Now, it's an interesting question because with Reynard, because she doesn't have her shade, she didn't even really have fear when she encountered him again the way that she maybe should have. So it's not even that the look that she gives him is like frightened. It's more bemused and just kind of like caution, you know, recognizing that like, oh, this man looks like somebody that I normally have to be a little bit careful around. And I have to remind myself I don't need to worry about that with him the same way. And I have to give props to this actor because the difference between what he's like as Richard versus Reynard is really marked. You can tell immediately by his body language which one he is. And I just find that kind of thing, seeing one actor portray two different people is to me a real test of their skill. There are a lot of actors out there who are in TV shows where they are meant to play like two different people, like their twin or doppelganger or whatever. And it feels silly to me. Like there's a whole thing in The Vampire Diaries, for example, in which one of the main characters has a doppelganger that is a lot crueler and more cunning and whatever. And I do not feel like she pulls that off. This is a whole different thing, and it's very subtle. There's not a huge posture change. There's not a lot of stuff that I can point to that really indicates why it's so different when he's Reynard. But it is. You just know. And she tells him that she has to find her shade, and he agrees to help her. So what they do is look at a map, and there's like this building that Hades and Persephone were meant to live in, but that has been abandoned for a minute on an island called Elysium. And he distracts everybody in the main area up at the lobby, basically, so that Quentin and Julia can jump on the computer and look through records and find out where they keep the shades. And it turns out it's not even on the computer. It's a paper filing system, which I just find crazy. But they're all marked with an E. And they put it together that E means Elysium. So they go over there. And it's a weird, like, so when they first approach the house, from the outside, it really, like, I mean, it has to be probably the same sort of set as what they use for break bills. It looks pretty similar. It's a beautiful, like, there's an overhead shot of the land surrounding it, and it looks like New England. There's a lot of trees that are beginning to, like, change color, which I felt like had to be sort of significant about the fact that it's, like, fall at this point because of the fact that maybe they're gone. I don't know if that means anything, but there are, like, guards around the outside of the building that have earpieces on and appear to be supposed to be monitoring the situation. So the fact that the two of them are able to get in as easily as they are is really just insulting to them. Like, they are not good at their job. And they go inside, and it's just kids running around with no supervisors. There's not, like, a single adult anywhere. Other than outside and guarding them, it's just a free-for-all. And they spot this one kid who's floating $1 in the air. It actually might be like a 20. I think, is that an Andrew Jackson on there? And he's floating it, and Julia goes up to him and asks, what was that you were doing? And he says, for the little boy with the shitty dad. He ran away, and now he's cold and hungry. He'll find it on the sidewalk any minute. And when Quentin points out this other girl who's making flowers bloom, the boy says, oh, she's in a hospital room. She's making them bloom. It's a really obvious miracle, but that's okay. The girl in the room is going to die anyway. So what it is tiny miracles that these kids are doing for people in shitty situations back on Earth, which, dope. Is that the coolest? Guys, if you could do that sort of shit, how much fun would that be? I would do that shit all the time. I don't know what I would even pick, but it would just be just left and right. I would be out of control. I would just be doing it all day. I just can't imagine being able to, like, you know, just any little thing. I'm trying to think what I like. Somebody's car breaks down, all of a sudden it's fixed. I don't know. Is that too big? Or, yeah, giving somebody money. I mean, money is really the big one. Let's be honest. When people need a miracle, it's usually that they need money. But then there are moments like that. Like I really like the idea of somebody who is missing a person a lot, getting some sort of signal that that person is still around and like aware of them or thinking about them. And I would like to think that I wouldn't be lying to them. Just all the sorts of little things that happen. We all have those moments where we're kind of not doing well. And a small thing, it doesn't necessarily turn the whole day around, but it offers like this little something that makes it just a bit more bearable, you know? Like this girl with the flowers blooming, the little girl is going to die anyway. It's not turning it around and making her survive. It's just comforting her in that moment. And that's the sort of thing that I think is really like underrated. As far as comfort is something that when we are in a bad situation, even if we can't change, if we have no control over what's actually happening, we do try and control our surroundings as we experience that thing. So this makes total sense to me. And I'm hoping that that kid with the shitty dad who ran away gets a little bit more than just that money. I hope that, you know, I hope that things work out for him. So he is the one who winds up leading them to Julia's shade. They like make some descriptions about what Julia's shade is like. And he's like, oh, the one that keeps getting in trouble for going in Miss Persephone's room. And she sort of laughs and is like, that sounds like her. Yep. So he leads them in, and this portrait is on the wall on the way there. And it's a picture of Our Lady Underground. And she realizes that this is Persephone. And she says something about how we were so stupid to love you and call upon you when in fact you're totally AWOL. I'm not sure if I'm overreacting here, but it seems a little bit nuts to me that she doesn't consider the fact that maybe Persephone is not here because she's been abducted or kept away somehow. It just seems like she's acting as if Persephone is shirking her duties. Like she's fucking gone off on some mythical vacation somewhere and never told anybody. And that is like nothing in this universe has ever just been somebody purely like dicking off. It's almost always somebody with an agenda or who is in danger or whatever, whenever something weird happens. So her assumption that it's just like, oh yeah, you're just AWOL doing what, God knows what. And I'm like, exactly. God knows. I bet Reynard knows. But she just, because there's no link in her brain between the fact that she tried to summon Our Lady Underground and got Reynard instead. And to me, we wind up finding out later that Reynard was in love with Persephone and there's clearly like something going on there. But even before we found that out, at this moment, I immediately figured he had done something, because why would she wind up with him instead if there wasn't any kind of connection between the two of them? But she doesn't take that leap at all. She just gets angry at this person, that this woman who is a goddess or whatever, half god, I don't even remember. And it just felt like she was not thinking things through in any way or making any sorts of connections. And on a show where characters frequently make kind of bonkers connections very, very easily when the script dictates it, it's really frustrating to have moments like this where it's like, this isn't even that much of a leap. There's a woman whom you tried to summon, you got a trickster god instead, and that woman winds up being missing. I mean, this doesn't take any sort of leap at all. It should be very clear that something is up here. There's something wrong. But whatever. So they go into the room where this Julia Shade is supposed to be. And she has this pretty, like, intense reaction as she, like, turns a corner. And we find out that she has got Alice's shade. She turns around with it. And Quentin has found hers. And she runs up to Quentin and hugs him. And it's such a weird thing. Like, it's just a strange situation because he was, like, you know, romantically interested in Alice. So to be seeing her shade, who's like a 12-year-old or 11-year-old kid, is just such a weird, it's the purest part of her personality, I guess. And Julia, meanwhile, is talking to her shade and is asking, "Are you okay?" And her shade's like, "Yeah, are you?" And she says, "Not really, not without you." And the shade asks, "Did you get Reynard yet?" And she says, "No, I'm trying." And the shade holds her hand. And there's like this sort of laughing in the background when she's looking at Alice and Quentin. And she says she talks about him all the time. She says that he's a good guy. And Julia asks her shade, "Is there any way that we can take her with us too?" And her shade shakes her head. Well, what winds up happening a little bit later is that they like bug out of this place with Alice's shade, and Julia leaves her shade behind. I'm not totally sure that I understand what's happening here. We'll get to it because, like, there's this whole thing with Quentin saying goodbye to Alice's shade and everything. And then Julia is looking at him and he, like, she tells him "you first" to get onto the elevator to leave, I guess, or to get in, like, walk through the doors to get out. And he doesn't realize what she is about to do, that she's walking out of there with Alice's shade. And she tells him that this isn't up for debate. I have one shot, and this is what I'm doing. Things change. And I don't really understand so here's my problem. They say that it's really hard to reunite a shade with its person after a prolonged separation. And what I'm questioning here is the practicality of taking a shade who has been disconnected from its person for as long as this one has been disconnected from Alice. Alice died at this point months ago, right? And I don't really like Quentin released a Niffin, and I guess that the assumption that Julia is making here is that we can get her shade back up there and reunite it with the Niffin version of her and bring Alice back to life, which I hate. I really do. I really, really do. Like, guys, I've basically taken back everything that I said, and this whole like fixation on Alice coming back, I'm just not interested. I'm not here for it at all. It's super boring to me, and I don't really understand the show's fascination with it. I don't understand why they feel the need to keep going back to this Alice can be saved well. Was anybody desperately asking for this? Were there any readers or viewers who were like super invested in Alice coming back? Like, I can't deny that the show doesn't feel that different without her on it. And it's not like I don't like Alice as a character, but there's plenty of other stuff to be done. And this constant like return to this doesn't do anything for the story, in my opinion. And pairing that with Julia getting to get her shade back and choosing not to take it when you're not totally sure that taking Alice's shade back with you is even going to work, I guess is supposed to be seen as like a really selfless thing to do, but it just strikes me as really stupid. It just feels like she's saying, I get my one shot and I'm going to make use of it. And I'm like, are you, or are you going to throw it down the toilet and flush? Like, that's what it feels like to me. You don't know this is going to do anything. As far as I'm aware, I don't believe that you've done research on whether or not this is going to turn out to work. And the idea of just like her shade that was desperately crying to Quentin to reunite the two of them, for her to just be like, oh, never mind. I'm going to leave you here after all. It seems really awful. So unless it turns out unexpectedly that Julia was able to get her shade back and grab Alice's shade, I'm also not going to believe that the Julia that we know, who, like, without her shade doesn't have much in the way of human emotion or response to things, would be interested in doing something like this. Unless, and this is the only possibility that I can see, there is a possibility of regrowing parts of your soul that are lost. And this is a thing in Dresden Files that, you know, you give away pieces of your soul. You like use them or lose them when there's like grief or loss, and they grow back. It just takes a little while to heal itself, but it will. So there have been a couple of moments of her like sort of smiling at Quentin and giving him a look that I think could hint at the fact that she does have some emotion somewhere despite not having her shade, which could mean that her shade is growing back or that there's something other that she can access. But if that's not the case, I don't really understand why somebody who doesn't have an emotional attachment to Quentin and who probably would not understand Quentin's emotional attachment to Alice would then forfeit their one chance to fix themselves if it wasn't something that they could really comprehend. So yeah, that's that with that storyline. And I don't know, y'all. Like, I'm concerned about this Alice thing, and I have a feeling that she's just gonna like be back eventually. I guess, like, I just don't have a lot of patience for it. I really don't. Really all I can say is that the one good thing that'll come from that is that once she's back, it's done, and we don't have to keep doing this. I hope. But then we may just get this with a different character. Somebody else will kind of die, and then we have to spend a whole season figuring out how to fix that person too. And it's just like, whatever. So, yeah. Consider me, Willow, saying bored now and skinning Alice. All right, so I'm going to back it up, and we're going to talk about what's going on with Fillory. So there's this whole like scene of Eliot greeting his future husband and really wanting to impress him and doing all of this like ceremony, and he wanted fire dancers and the whole thing. And it turns out that Hubs does not give a shit about that stuff, is not interested. And he says, take me somewhere that we can become a bit better acquainted alone. And this leads to a pretty awesome scene with him telling Eliot basically, like, because Eliot's like, hey, we're not married yet, so, you know, like, all of this seduction and everything isn't actually going to be able to lead to anything. Like, that, my dick doesn't work if we're not married, basically. And he's like, yeah, no, I know that, but we don't have to touch each other. We can show one another how we like to be touched. And he blindfolds him and everything. And I thought this was really erotic, and I thought this was well done. He blindfolds him and is like right up against his neck as he's like whispering to him about, you know, all of this like learning about each other and everything. And Eliot is standing there waiting for something to happen with this blindfold on. And he gets sort of like, his posture sort of changes as nothing happens, and he realizes that like, and I want to say that the way his posture changes, it sort of feels like he's going from a moment of happiness and excitement to, all right, what the fuck has gone wrong now? Like, he pulls off his blindfold in the manner of somebody who is just, I know that everything has been going a little too well for a little too long. So clearly I'm about to like take this blindfold off and it's going to be fucking chaos somehow. And you know what? He's not wrong. It took me a minute to understand what the fuck, because he looks down and I forgot the husband's name, future husband's name, but his clothes are just in a pile on the floor. And it takes a second before you see that there's like a rat inside the clothing. And then I was like, oh, he got turned into a rat. But for a second, I was like, was this all a trick? Did this dude not even exist? Like, I thought maybe there had been some huge illusion and that they had been sort of about to try and trick Eliot, but that something he did managed to like break through the illusion and cause it to fall apart. Does that make sense? So I was sort of like, oh my God, did he wind up like fighting a battle against somebody else, or did the guy who agreed to marry him decide that he didn't want to go through with it and sent some like sort of a construct to take his place at a wedding and like double cross him or something? And no, it just turns out that everybody in the castle, somebody has turned into a rat. It's like a 50%, I feel like. I thought that it was just going to be this one dude, but it's not. There's a bunch of them. And we see a little bit later a cage that is filled with all these little rats. Now, Eliot this entire time has been wondering where the hell Fen is. And now he's thinking that Fen has to be a rat. And you see Margot constantly giving him these looks as she chooses to not tell him. And I can't deal with the fact that she didn't tell him what was going on, y'all. Like, I really expected that this episode would start off with her telling him, because you told Fen. What are you doing? You've got to, you've got to know that he's going to find out imminently. Just do it. But she doesn't. And he's asking his advisors what he can do about this, and none of them are familiar with this magic. They don't know what this even is. So, jumping ahead a little bit, we have the confrontation between Margot and the representative from the Fae. And he's saying, you know, you tried to get cute with this deal. And, you know, we do what we've got to do. And she says, so you turned half of my people into snake food. And he's like, oh, no. By do what we mean to do, I meant we took Fen. We didn't do this thing with the rats. That's not us. And she looks very, like, disbelieving. She says it smells like some of their whimsical bullshit. And this dude tells her, yeah, whimsical is not the thing that I would call the fairies. Which, honestly, if you were Margot and you saw the fairies that we've been seeing just hovering around the castle, staring with their creepy, unblinking eyes and their fucking cartoonish hair, would you call them whimsical? I feel like that's off the mark, Margot. I feel like you should even know that it's off the mark. But in any case, Eliot is despairing for information, and he winds up spiking all of this wine with truth serum potion. And sitting down with everybody and talking to all of them about what's been going on and making sure that they all tell him the truth about what's happening. And he says if anyone has anything to say, and their closest advisor says, I'm embezzling funds from the castle treasury. And he's like, oh shit. And Eliot says, there's truth serum in this wine. I've truthied you. Anyone else? Abigail and I have been using the castle guards to run an escort service. And he says, gross, but clever. Doesn't help us. Should have made this stronger. And Margot, who did have some of the alcohol, gets this look on her face like she's trying to hold back from saying anything. Guys, I wanted to believe so bad that she said this because she finally realized it was time. But it really seems like, from her body language in this scene, that she couldn't help it. And I hate that. She says, it was me. And tells him that she made a deal with the fairies and that she knows where Fen is. And this leads to Eliot basically doing exactly what I said last episode, where I was kind of like, you know, saying y'all aren't going to get accolades from the people for fixing the problems that you yourself caused. It's not too surprising that Eliot isn't super popular with folks. And he seems to recognize this with Margot and is just like, girl, you're out here making deals with my child to fix messes that you started. And I can't have you running out here doing shit unsupervised anymore, apparently, because you can't be trusted. So he winds up having her locked in a dungeon and tells them to make sure that she gets her coconut oil, which I have to admit I fucking cackled at. But it's really awful to watch. Like, he doesn't want to do this, you know? Like, this isn't a thing that he thought he was going to have to worry about, is trusting Margot. The two of them have seemed to be so entirely on the same page and such a team that her fucking him over like this has to hurt more than anybody doing this. It's got to be really brutal to realize that as king, there's literally nobody that he can really rely on that isn't going to have some measure of their own agenda and their own shit going on. And that's harsh. So later on, he's talking to fucking Josh. And Josh, he's explaining to him how frustrated he is with the fact that he doesn't know how to manage this kingdom. By the way, Josh like walks in, or Josh had been in a rat form, and he turns him back into a person, and he's standing there buck ass naked. And he says, how did you turn me back? He says, a special Philorian mint and about 50 straight minutes of casting, so I'm going to need a minute to recharge. You sure you don't want any clothes? And Josh just says, eh. And he asks about Margot and why she can't help turn people back. And this is when Eliot says, I just, don't have anybody that I can hand things off to. I don't know how many of you have been, and I've realized how many sentences I start actually with this. Like, I don't know how many of you, but those of you who have been in this situation where you're kind of in charge of a thing and you don't feel like there are many or any people that you can rely on to take over stuff, it is a kind of a terrible feeling. Like, you want to trust other people, but you get let down and kind of reminded that that's really not an option. And it feels like that's where he is. So when Josh suggests that he get some governors, I kind of expected Eliot to reject that idea out of hand and just be like, there's clearly nobody I can trust, so I'm not doing that. But instead, he seems interested. And he's like, oh, so now I have to figure out who to choose, and this is another fucking job. And Josh is like, well, you don't have to. You could let the people choose who they want. And Eliot's like, oh my God, you just invented democracy, and that is such a good idea. I'm totally going to do that. And all of a sudden, he is back in the fucking physical kids dorm. And fucking Todd comes up to him and is like, I thought you were king in Fillory or some shit. What are you doing? And he's like, yeah, I was. I think I just got kicked out. And that's kind of dope. I love the idea that just talking about installing a democracy, Fillory is just like, oh, you're fired. No, we're not doing this at all. Like, I have no idea what this looks like now. Back in Fillory, what it seems has happened. I don't know if this affects the deal with the fairies at all. I don't know if this affects, like, I have no idea about Margot's standing. Like, is the fact that she's just been locked up, but he's not king anymore, does that get her a get out of jail free card? Like, I really have no idea. But I love this turn of events. I think this is really fun. I don't know. I think this is a really cool idea. So that's pretty much everything specifically with Fillory. And then we have what's going on with Penny and Katie. I want to say that Penny and Katie is one of the few romantic relationships that I really can get behind. Like, I'm not, and by a few romantic relationships, I don't mean on this show. I mean ever. Like, I'm not somebody who really cares about romance on screen, except in a very few special cases. It has to be done extremely well, and the actors have to have a chemistry that seems genuine to me. And it feels to me a lot of times on television like that's not really the factor that is considered, is whether or not people actually have chemistry. It's just more like, well, these two people are attractive and they each fit these other roles, so we're just going to act like they have chemistry and hope everybody else sort of goes along with it because they are two attractive people and it just makes sense that they would want to bone each other. And that's just really not exciting. But Katie and Penny, they really do have a genuine chemistry. I wouldn't be surprised if it wound up that they like hooked up in real life. But they are like, the first time that we see them together this episode, she's like dreaming, and it turns out that she is having like a sex dream about Penny, but he's actually in her dream, like his consciousness, which leads to a fun like question on what this is called, and I think he calls it inception or something like that. But the two of them just feel really right together, and I'm rooting for the two of them to like not go through another crisis where they're torn apart. So he is determined to, first of all, I forgot about this. He's trying to learn how to cast magic from his asshole. Y'all, is this really a thing? He calls it sphincter magic. And the librarian is like, well, we all need a healthy pelvic floor, even if it doesn't work. And I'm like, okay, like, how does that work? And it answers my question about like people who are disabled just not being able to cast. So apparently there are other options, but they're very difficult. You know, it would have been cool if it wasn't, but whatever. And he says, if it gets me there, no shame. But he is assigned to this girl who is going to be his supervisor. And it's a weird situation because she looks younger than him, but she doesn't look so much younger than him that I actually really understand his like So what, I'm babysitting now? It took me a minute to understand that she is supposed to be, you know, like good 8 years younger or so. Because she looks older to me. But this girl, it seems, has been placed here in the library for like her protection, because her father is like, she says something about how he's a legitimate businessman, which apparently all of us agree means some kind of mobster. I like to think of her as being like John Marcone's long lost daughter. Eliot, meanwhile, is having this whole thing with Katie where he's trying to help her get into the poison room. And there's an amazing scene where he's pretending to try and seduce the librarian in order to get her name, because they think that if they look through the book of her life in the library, there's going to have to be information in that book on how to get into the poison room. Now, his attempt to seduce her does not go well. She's just basically like, you seem really immature and like you're just overcompensating all the time. I'm really not interested. And I was like, girl, you ain't wrong. Every single thing she said about him was 100% correct and on point. But then she... I love her. She even has her like lunch bag, which is, each of them is labeled with a name. She even has that like rolled up so that he can't read her name on it. And the girl that he is being supervised by sees him attempt to do this and sort of is like in the background snickering at him. And she winds up getting him the name. But it turns out that that was also put in the poison room, this woman's life book, because evidently she badass and also super duper dangerous, which makes total sense. And I also liked the fact that she was like asking him about how, because he says something about the fact that I wasn't trying to seduce her. And she says, well, then explain to me why I was like 20 feet away and it wasn't even directed at me and I wanted to fuck you, which I thought was pretty good. She turns out to be very foul-mouthed in a way that even Penny is not prepared for. And I find it deeply amusing. So he's having a conversation with Katie and talking about trying to break in there. And this girl pops up and is just like, oh, hey, what's up? Yeah, I'll totally help you break in there. I've heard everything you guys are talking about, by the way, in this weird dream state. And, you know, you can start from square one on your own, or you can hop the line and join me. And acts like she has got some abilities or some knowledge that they would not have access to without her. And he says something about how it's not safe. And the girl says, you know what's not safe? Anything. Like, I'm going to do what I want. So I like this turn of events. I don't know what this girl is or what her abilities are, but I'm totally here for it. Meanwhile, Katie, who wakes up from her inception dream, is woken up because the senator has returned. Guys, I wish that I had a little bit more time to do this justice, but the senator's storyline is gripping. I am into this. Super into it. He figures out that he has been low-key mind controlling everybody in his life. And it is a brutal moment. Like, you know, he first of all, his dad is fucking hovering around, fucking with everybody. And he's not super comfortable with that, but there's really nothing that he can do to stop him. There's a bill that he really wants to pass. And his dad is just like, well, just invite the guy over to talk and, you know, make him vote for it. And he's like, I'm not going to do that. And his dad is like, are you fucking stupid? You've been doing that your entire life. That's what you do. You just don't even know you're doing it, but you 100% have been. So he tries it. And when he's really trying, apparently it's a little too high a dose. And that dude fucking has essentially a heart attack. And he winds up being okay, I'm pretty sure. But, you know, it's a close thing. So he's sort of like panicking, realizing all of this damage that he could do and maybe has done simply because he has believed so completely that he was in the right that he has managed to like force people into to seeing things from his point of view. And his wife, he tries to explain to her what he is and who he is. And of course she doesn't believe him because fucking why would you? And he's talking to her and he's like, I know that this doesn't make sense, but I need you to believe me and understand. And all of a sudden her demeanor completely changes. And she says something like, oh, sweetie, you know that I believe you always do what's right and what's best. And I will be here for you and support you no matter what. And she walks away. And he gets this fucking expression on his face, like he kind of low-key wants to throw up. And he talks to his father later and is just like, was anything in my relationship with her real? And yeah, essentially, he's been like roofing her entire life and is just now understanding that maybe she doesn't even love him. Maybe he wanted her so much when they met that he managed to force her into a relationship against her will and had no idea. And now they're together because he continually forces her to drop her better judgment and turn away from what's best for her in favor of what's best for him. Whoa, if that isn't the perfect fucking metaphor for like patriarchy and society and the fact that we often don't even realize how we're playing into it, and men especially don't. I love it, and it's horrible. Like, it's horrible. This actor, you know, and he talks to his dad and tries to be like, what the fuck? And his dad is like, what do you mean, what the fuck? You out here trying to be president. You know you're better than everybody. You know it in your bones. You've known it since you were a fucking kid. You're trying to ascend to the position that you know you ought to have in the world. This isn't me forcing you to do anything. This is your nature. I just stepped into your life just in the past like week. Don't put this all on me. And he's trying to be like, yeah, but I didn't know. And Reynard's just like, so what? You're doing what you do. And this finally drives him to go and find Katie. And he's like, look, if you're wanting to take my dad out, sign me up. I'm here. Because fuck this guy. And I'm very curious if he's going to be able to like tap into his magic and actually learn to control it at all. And I am extremely here for the weirdness of this school now being like touched by a legitimate American senator who is a full-grown adult. Like, just what a weird foil, you know? So, yeah, I am here for this storyline. I love this. I hope that this is, like, a thing that continues on. Even though I don't want Reynard around forever, I'm just really fascinated by this little, like, subplot. So yeah, I think I'm done. Thank you guys so much for coming into the chat and hanging out with me. Sue is asking how she forgot the sphincter magic. Girl, I'm trying to forget it already. I'll tell you what. But yeah, and thank you, Jesse, for commissioning this. I hope that you guys are enjoying listening, and I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. So until that, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.